I'm Claudia Dean with the AAPOR Heritage Committee, and I'm very pleased to be here today in mid-August 2011 with Diane Colasanto, who has graciously agreed to be interviewed for AAPOR's Heritage Interview Series. And just to give you a brief bio of Diane before we delve into the details, she's a graduate of Trinity College in Connecticut and holds a PhD in sociology from the University of Michigan. She began her career in teaching as faculty at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where she started one of the nation's first specialized survey research programs. Diane moved from academia to the Gallup organization in the early 80s, beginning as chief methodologist and working her way up to senior vice president. She left Gallup to become a partner of Princeton Survey Research Associates, where she worked until the company was sold in 2003. Diane has been a very active AAPOR member, serving as president of AAPOR from 1996 to 1997, putting in several additional terms on AAPOR's executive committee in various capacities. Diane, welcome, and thank you so much for agreeing to be here. I really appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
We're going to start at the beginning. Tell us how this all began. How did you first get the first inkling that maybe survey research was something that you might like to do?
Well, I did my first survey in high school.
Very precocious.
Yeah, that's right. Don't ask about the sample design.
Right.
I did a survey about television censorship for my senior thesis in my AP English class. We had to do a research paper.
Wow.
And I decided I wanted to know what people thought about TV censorship. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour had just been canceled for some scandalous thing that was said, and I really wanted to see what people thought about this issue. So there was an early sign that I was destined
there
for
was
this.
some interest there.
Yeah.
And then, did you follow up on that in college, or you were going a different direction when you got to Trinity?
I was. I started out as a math major. I loved math in high school, and thought I would be a math major. Had kind of a rocky first couple of years of college. I transferred twice before I landed at Trinity College. And when I landed at Trinity, I knew I wasn't going to be a math major, but I didn't know what I was going to do. And I just lucked into taking some amazing sociology classes there. It was a teeny department, 3 faculty members, I think. But really unusual in that it had a sociology lab with a counter sorter and a key punch machine and a terminal to the Williams College Roper Center archive. And I started doing actual research as a sophomore in college. It was really exciting. It was really fun. I was so inspired by my professors there, and that did it.
There was someone there, I know you mentioned, that you had a big influence on you. Who was that?
Yeah, my professor Norman Miller, who his classes, no matter what they were about, religion, research methods, cities, whatever, they were just so inspiring. And he and I just clicked. He hired me to work in the sociology lab. So back when I was in my late teens, maybe, I was actually working on Roper Center data. Now I'm the chair of the board of the Roper Center. Right. But it was through his influence, and he encouraged me every step of the way, and in fact is the person responsible for me going to Michigan for graduate school. I had been intent on applying to law school. Imagine that. And he said, "Are you nuts? You love this. You're really good at this. You ought to do this as a career." And he gave me really good advice about where I should apply, what I should look for, and he was absolutely right. It worked out great, and I've stayed in touch with him pretty much since then. He's just a terrific guy.
That's so unusual to have been an undergraduate actually getting a chance to do research. It's usually something graduate students feel lucky to get a chance to work with a professor on research.
Exactly.
And when you landed at Michigan, Michigan is sort of known in our field for being big quantoid school, big department, lots of grad students. What was it like there for you?
It was a difficult transition for me. I, come from a working class Italian American background. Was not the first in my family to go to college, but certainly the first in my family to go to graduate school. And it was just a different world. This intellectual life was not one that I felt comfortable with or thought I could be part of. So the beginning of graduate school was a real eye-opener for me, and I was actually kind of scared to be in this environment because, you know, people would answer questions in classes giving, you know, footnotes to their answers and citing literature, and I didn't know any of this stuff. But I had a fantastic group of friends. Our cohort was really connected. And I soon figured out what my place was there and got working with Howard Schumann, who was another big influence on my career and just a joy to work for. I was a teaching assistant for 2 years for the Detroit area study. Again, doing research, sending interviewers out in the field to do personal interviews, you know, doing all the nitty-gritty parts of research and from the ground up. It was a fantastic experience.
For people who don't have the Michigan background, I was a Detroit area study researcher, but can you say just what that is, what that project is? It no longer exists, unfortunately. It went on for probably 50 years. It was an annual research project that took place in the Detroit metropolitan area where a faculty member would serve as the principal investigator and set a topic for the year's investigation. The students and faculty would work together to write a questionnaire, design a sample, test it, and then at the end of the academic year, the students would transfer to, in my year it was Mercy College in suburban Detroit. We lived in the dorms and we went out every day in our rental cars to do personal interviews with the residents of the Detroit metropolitan area. And then in the fall we analyzed the data and each wrote research reports based on it. So it was an amazing experience. What attracted you to Professor Schumann, and what kind of work were you able to do with him during grad school?
Well, he was interested in race relations, which also was an interest of mine. And the really attractive thing about the Detroit area study the year that I worked for Howard and that he was principal investigator is that it was a study where there were two investigators. Ren Farley, who was a demographer at Michigan, was his co-investigator. And so you had the perspective of a demographer and a social psychologist together shaping this survey. And that was very much the kind of approach that I like to take. It was, I was always trying to combine things that didn't usually get combined that were in their individual silos. And so that was a great experience to get to work with the two of them. But, you know, Howard was just really smart about surveys. I mean, he taught me so much about the importance of trends and multiple measurements to get at a concept, and most importantly, experimentation as a way to uncover what's really behind people's responses. So he was just a pleasure to work for.
When during that process did you think, you know, maybe I want to be an academic, and what else did you consider? And
I didn't want to be an academic. I went to Michigan wanting to learn quantitative sociology, quantitative methods. My idea was that I would be an applied survey researcher. But in those years when you went to a place like Michigan, there was one career path, one expectation, and you know, you buy into that and it becomes very attractive. It becomes the thing that you want to achieve. And also the faculty at that time really didn't have the ties to the non-academic world. So even if you were committed to going in a different direction, you'd have to do it on your own. It would be very hard to get help from your major professor or anybody else. So everything was oriented toward becoming an academic sociologist. And I was happy to do so, and landing at Wisconsin, which was another fantastic place, huge department, quantitative orientation. It was a very comfortable place to be. There was a lot of support for junior faculty. It was terrific. But I really still love the non-academic research, and that's what I wanted to do, and I was, lucky to eventually get there.
And before we leave Wisconsin and get you there, you started a program there that was sort of unusual for the time. What gave you that idea, and was it a difficult sell?
No, it actually was the other way around. People in the department came to me and asked me if I would do this. I had been teaching a lot of courses in methods and statistics. Certainly, people knew my interest in non-academic research because I was at the time involved in a big project for the state of Wisconsin, and I did some consulting while I was on the faculty. So I was, much to the detriment of my academic career, I was spread thin over a number of different practical projects, but because of that interest and because of the courses I took, they thought I would be a good person to start this, and I was thrilled to do it. I really thought it was an important thing to do for the students there. I thought it would add a lot to the program, and they're really, I don't think it was the first program, but it was certainly around the time that some of these other programs were starting up. It was one of the first, and I thought there was a need in the profession to train people in that direction to have non-academic careers. So it wasn't a hard sell. It was welcomed, and it continues there.
And it was teaching students to do what sorts of things?
To be researchers for government, in private corporations. So it was teaching them about sampling and questionnaire design, arranging internships for them to actually get some experience doing this, which was a little hard to do in Madison, Wisconsin. There weren't a whole lot of places we could place people, and that was something that was really a limitation to our program. But the idea was to give them enough practical skills that they could really contribute to a research program in a non-academic setting.
So this was sort of a beginning of getting out of the academic silo, and you're now having to make these connections for students who aren't able
right
outside of it.
Right.
Well, how do we get you from there to the East Coast and Gallup? That is very mysterious.
Well, it wasn't mysterious. I didn't get tenure at Wisconsin because my career was so scattershot,
right.
And I was spending my time doing things that wouldn't help me in getting tenure. So I had to leave Wisconsin. I wanted to come back to the East Coast because that's where my family was, and I wanted to be closer. So my husband at the time and I set our sights on anywhere between Boston and Washington. We both applied for jobs everywhere in that corridor. The deal was whoever got the first one would narrow the other one's sight, and I got the first one at Gallup. My husband subsequently went on to get a job at Gallup and Robinson, which did advertising research, and so it was a great job. I interviewed for all kinds of jobs, and some of them were scary, but Gallup was great.
It wasn't just any job. I mean, can you say what job it was? And
it was to be the chief methodologist of Gallup, and Gallup was in a real bind at that time because they had been without a chief methodologist for a couple of months, and the previous guy left abruptly, and it was coming up on a presidential election year. I think they were quite eager to find somebody. And I actually credit AAPOR with my getting that, because it was through conversations I had with everybody I could think of at AAPOR that year when I didn't get tenure that somebody knew of Gallup's need and put me in touch with Andy Kohut, and the rest is history.
Now, were they nervous? Because what I know about commercial survey research is they have mixed views about academics. So here you are, you're an academic, and you're coming into the methodology field, which, correct me if I'm wrong, is predominantly male, and here you are, you're a young woman. How did this all go over?
I think they were nervous. I mean, I don't think Andy, who is now my husband, was nervous. He did a really extensive, very focused interview with me. In fact, it was the best interview I'd had through these many months of doing job interviews. It really focused on, you know, practical knowledge of what I would have to do. And it was tough. It was very tough. And I think he had confidence in me, though maybe he was a little worried about how I would make the transition from academia to the real world, and I was worried about that too. I think everybody else at Gallup, though, was really skeptical of me. I heard many, many years later that Dr. Gallup, who was still alive at the time, pulled Andy aside right before, you know, during this campaign for the '84 election and said to Andy, "You think the girl's up to it?" And Andy said, yes, he did. But, you know, I was the girl, and people in meetings would ask me to go get them cups of coffee in the middle of a meeting, and people were very, they really tried to push me around and bully me through that first year. I actually hated the beginning of my career at Gallup because it was a kind of a wacky place. There was 2 months worth of questions for the methodologists that hadn't been answered, and everyone needed them answered immediately. It was a pace of work totally different than what I was used to, and I had to learn things that I didn't know, and it was really tough. It was very stressful. I knew from day one that we'd better get the '84 election right, because Gallup had gotten the '80 election wrong, and it was a horrible, horrible experience for them, and they didn't want it to happen again. And, you know, so be careful, do all these other things, but don't let this thing slip. It was a very much sink or swim kind of environment.
Okay, well, put us out of our misery. What happened in the '84 election?
We got it exactly right. It was the first and maybe the only time in Gallup's history that there was absolutely zero deviation from the actual election result. It was, you know, of course, really lucky that that happened. There is that random component, but yeah, I worked really hard on that. Andy Kohut worked really hard on that. We had a great team. Everybody was really focused, and we just did everything right and lucked out at the same time, and we had a huge success with it. It was really a kick, and it sort of, after a year, finally, people at Gallup started taking me seriously.
What kind of things does the chief methodologist do for people who haven't been in that role? What were they asking you to do? And
well, sampling was the number one thing. You were responsible for every sample, for every survey in the organization. Data analysis beyond crosstabs. So every project director got a set of crosstabs to report on, but sometimes there would be a regression analysis needed, or factor analysis, or cluster analysis, or something else, and that was the chief methodologist's job to do that. You were responsible for data quality across the spectrum. You know, how well the interviewers were doing their jobs. You name it. You know, things that were going on in the field. And also for meeting with project directors and their clients where there was some kind of tricky methodological aspect to a project. So maybe trying to ask questions on a sensitive topic where the project director felt that having the methodologist in working on these problems with the client would be useful. So it was a real mixed bag. It was, at any given time, I would be doing maybe 15 to 16, 17, 18 projects in one way or another. And it was very fast-paced. And I got to be involved in pretty much everything in the company, which was a lot of fun. It was really great.
How was the field changing during that time? Or you probably were taking on a lot of different challenges. I mean, the job wasn't the same when you came as when you left Gallup, and you left it as senior VP, so you had also worked your way up, but polling was also changing a lot during that time.
It was changing a lot. Interestingly enough, one of the things that changed about the time I came to Gallup, and in fact I helped in this a little bit, was technology. Gallup shocked me when I got there in 1983 because they were doing research the way I had been doing it when I was an undergraduate, with a counter sorter. Not everything was being done on a counter sorter, but some surveys still were being processed that way.
I don't know what a counter sorter is.
You have cards with the data on the cards, and you sort them physically with this machine. And no one had a personal computer. I mean, I had come from Wisconsin, where we were actually using early, types of email and instant messaging, and everybody had a computer. No one had a personal computer at Gallup. I got the first, and I insisted on it because I had, I guess I had gotten pregnant with Nick, and I felt I needed, technology to do this transition of, being on maternity leave and then coming back to work. But in any case, there was, no one was using word processing. Only the secretaries had some kind of dedicated machine that was just a word processor, but still they'd be the ones typing this in. It was interesting to kind of come back technologically, and it was a push, and it happened really fast. Once Andy made the decision that we're going to modernize, we did modernize and caught up, but the first impression was kind of a shock. And Gallup was just starting to do more varied types of research, rely less on the Gallup poll with its personal interviews and very limited set of subject matter, to doing telephone interviews that involved complex kinds of oversamples, and doing research in a number of different areas having to do with social issues, policy issues. So there was a lot of growth at Gallup at that time, and a lot of change in the kinds of things that we did.
You eventually worked your way up. I mean, I guess you got their faith in the end, huh?
In the end.
And then eventually you decided to strike out a little bit on your own with Andy into a smaller market and public opinion research shop. Can you tell a little bit about that phase of your career?
Gallup was sold to a company called SRI out of Lincoln, Nebraska in the fall of 1988. And that was a really good thing for the Gallup organization. It brought people who had a lot of energy and different ideas about what direction to take Gallup. But it turned out to be, they were very different from us in terms of how they thought about the kinds of businesses Gallup should be in, and the way people should focus their time and effort. And Andy, about a year after that sale, decided that he would just as soon try to do this on his own. He had been working for the Times Mirror Corporation on some really interesting research. They loved working with him. It gave him an opportunity to strike out on his own, knowing that he had this big, wonderful client who would stick with him. My intention was to stay at Gallup, actually, but about 2 months after Andy left, they were really wanting to change my role in the company in a way that I didn't like. And so I decided to leave 2 months later and join Andy and work with him in Princeton Survey Research. It turned out to be just a great move. That was such a wonderful company that we built together. And, you know, we really had been a little concerned. We'd had a lot of success at Gallup, but of course you never know whether you're successful because you're part of Gallup or you're successful because your clients like what you do for them. And we learned pretty quickly that the clients liked what we did for them. A couple of clients that had worked with us at Gallup decided to work with us at the new company, and through word of mouth, really, we were able to grow that company to be something that was pretty substantial, and do the kind of work that we had been doing at Gallup that I thought at the time Gallup didn't value as much, and here we were able to do it for ourselves. And it was a great feeling to work really hard, which we had done at Gallup, but now we're working really hard for our own benefit, and that was nice.
And that was a lot of policy-oriented research. Maybe you could just give us a couple examples of projects you liked. That
Sure. Well, one project that came with me when I left Gallup and moved to PSRA was a big project about child well-being for the National Commission on Children. AARP was another client that I had worked for at Gallup and then worked for while at PSRA, doing a lot of work on all kinds of things having to do with aging, you know, poverty among the aged, consumer fraud, political values. Did a lot of work on health. Kaiser Family Foundation was a big early client of ours, and so I did work on teen sexuality and knowledge about contraception, projects on health insurance. It was a real gamut of projects, all of them interesting.
I wanted to not leave out your time as AAPOR, because this was all overlapping, your time with AAPOR in various leadership roles. It was kind of overlapping with these different stages of your career. But I know that your term as president was probably one of the more challenging terms that anybody's had. Maybe you could tell a little bit about that.
Well, we did something when I was president that was really different, which was we actually censured another public opinion researcher for a violation of the standards code. And that was Frank Luntz, who was a very prominent Republican pollster, had reported on some research that he did for the so-called contract with America before the 1994 elections. And he had talked a lot about what Americans wanted and how the Republicans would sign this contract to give the public what they wanted. And someone had complained that they couldn't find any support for the assertions that Luntz was making about his research, because he wouldn't release any of the details. And so a standards complaint was filed by an AAPOR member, and the standards committee, under the leadership of Dick Kulka, started pursuing a case. 14 months later, we actually ended up censuring him because he never did disclose anything, and we went through a very long, very torturous process of trying to get him to provide minimum stuff, you know, question wordings, dates of interview, margins of error, and we just couldn't get this information out of him. And believe me, it was very reluctantly that we censured him. We were really worried about what the fallout would be. For one, he wasn't an AAPOR member, so he'd never signed on to our code. For two, we thought, and a number of people on council were worried about being sued for saying something negatively publicly about him. We didn't know what his reaction would be. But I'm glad we did it. It was very stressful. It was very time-consuming. We didn't know if we were doing the right thing, but it really was the right thing to point this out. the membership reacted in the most positive way. They were so happy to feel that we could make a difference, that the standards that we thought were so important really did mean something. I mean, this censure came after years and years and years of standards investigations that didn't go anywhere and didn't produce anything and were just, wrist slaps with no consequences. And I don't know that the consequences of this were so great on Frank Luntz. I don't think they were. But we were able to call attention in a very public way to the things that were important to us. And we really did make the membership feel that that the association could really play a role in the quality of public opinion data and how it's used.
It's interesting to hear your take on it, because I wondered about that, because I imagine it would be very stressful, because this clip was all over the media at the time, and even now it's one of the things
still comes up
all the time, right?
Yeah.
But you, during your tenure as president, and when you gave your remarks, your end of term remarks, talked about how we needed to be doing more to make sure that the standards we were embracing were validated out in, not validated, but, that other people were being held to them, that we were saying, look, we're trying to do good research, and, we want to try and police good research a little bit, though I know police isn't the right word. We're now back on a track where we're trying to do a transparency initiative. So I don't know that we've gotten that far. Why is it so hard? I mean, should we be doing this? Have you had further thoughts watching every other president try and do the same thing?
Struggle with the same thing? It's very difficult. And the first thing that's difficult about it is, what is good research? Our standards are very minimal. Basically, they're just, tell us what you did so that we can replicate it, comment on it, and maybe debate it. It's not, here's how you do good research, because we can't get any consensus among the members of AAPOR or on council, or there is no way to get consensus of the way to do things. That's just too sensitive an area. I don't think we've come very far, and as surveys have gotten ubiquitous, it's more and more difficult to get this information out, to have anyone pay attention to it, and to have any of the evaluations of it have an impact. So I think the Transparency Initiative is the way to go, to try to centralize this information. It's extremely time consuming. I mean, I proposed a way to do this in my presidential address. Not that I was going to do it, but as it turns out, others did take that as an inspiration. Mike Traugott actually spent the next year on a project to see what it would be like to actually do what I proposed. Extremely time consuming. Who's going to pay for that? I mean, that's the problem. So we've made progress. I think there's still a long way to go, and I'm curious to see how this initiative plays out.
With the perspective you have from academia to Gallup to PSRA to your AAPOR work, it really has been over the last couple of years we've seen an enormous amount of turbulence in the field. You've stepped away a little bit. Do you have any thoughts from that perspective of sort of what the challenges are that lie ahead? Or, I mean, do you take comfort from the challenges the profession has overcome during your time in it to what we might face?
Well, I'm still really proud to be a former public opinion researcher, and I look at the stuff that my husband's doing, Andy Kohut. It's terrific research, and there's so many people doing great research, really making a contribution to the public debate, and I'm proud to have been a part of that. One of the things that led me to be so, I guess, less enamored of doing the work, and it made it easier for me to retire at an early age. I retired when we sold the company, is the ubiquity of research. got easy for anyone to do a survey, for anyone to consider themselves an expert and able to craft good questions and, you know, draw a sample and analyze data, so that there's just a lot of really bad research being done, and it was harder to distinguish the good from the bad. You know, not for me, not for someone who knows about it, but in the public, in the media's mind, these things, you know, carefully done work and shoddily done work were being treated equally. And for someone like me who was in the commercial world serving clients, all my work was in the service of clients and trying to solve their problems. I found that it was getting harder and harder to convince clients that they needed to pay for the craftsmanship that went into a good survey, because even clients were thinking, well, there's a cheaper way to do this, there's a faster way to do this, and it became less satisfying for me as the person carrying this out to do the work and also to compete against other ways of collecting data about public opinion.
Which kind of brings us back to what you wanted out of your AAPOR presidency was if we could just look at it all a little bit more closely and shine a little bit more light on it.
It might be easier to get the ultimate consumers of research to be able to distinguish between things they should pay attention to and things they shouldn't pay attention to. So,
have I missed anything major?
No, thanks.
These are the highlights. Thank you so much for your time, Diane. I really appreciate you coming. Thanks to the Kaiser Family Foundation for letting us use their studio today. And it's been a pleasure to talk to you.
It's a pleasure always to talk to you, Claudia.
Thanks.